obviously Cyberpunk, a big launch disaster. A lot of people love it. I think that's great. But obviously the game is a buggy mess. Sony just removed it, blah, blah, blah. We all know what's going on. I only just realized, I was reading an article or a post on NeoGAF about the CEO of Project Red, a guy named Adam Badowski, who's next to Kojima there in that picture. He's the CEO. He was going through Twitter and liking or disliking posts about Sony removing the game and whatnot. And that's the first time I ever realized the fact I'm about to tell you, which is why, oh my God, this game, in my opinion, is in trouble. That guy there with Kojima, little Adam Badowski, he's the games director and he's the CEO of CD Projekt Red, the company making the goddamn game. That was the easiest, well, it was the hardest lesson to learn in games from an ego standpoint. But it was one of the most obvious lessons to learn in games, which is you never give the creative full control. Just like you never give the producer control over the creative. Ever, 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 ever. Sony Santa Monica to this day still follows that lesson that Shannon Studstill and I took from the failure that was development at Sony up in Foster City. I was doing this game called Dark Guns, and I'd come off Twisted Metal 2, and I was given pretty much keys to the castle. What do you want to do, Jaffe? Oh, I want to make a shooter. I want to do internal development. Sure, go. I hired the people. I managed the people. I creative directed the people. I creative directed the game. I'm like, well, that's what you do. I'm in charge. Dude, absolute disaster. And that was a game that was... I don't know how many people were in that game. That was probably like 12, 15 people I was managing. And it was an absolute disaster. Now, part of that's I'm a terrible manager. This guy may be a better manager. Truth be told, this guy also directed The Witcher 2. Here's the difference. He directed The Witcher 2, which a lot of people actually suggest is better than Witcher 3. I haven't played it. That was a team of about 100 people. Cyberpunk, which he also directed, is a team of over 500 people. And the challenge becomes is who is driving the bus on any given day of the week. And for me, when I was doing producing and directing, I was never able to let the director take a back seat. The director always won because ultimately my philosophy is and was that the player comes first and you can apologize later for everything else if everyone's making money and everyone's happy because the player is happy. And thus the director wins out. It doesn't work that way, though, because you can't actually make a game that way because there are so many moving parts to games. Certainly there were back then. That was a PS1 game that I was on. Witcher 2 was even more. And Cyberpunk, are you kidding me? Probably one of the most complicated games to make in the history of games. This is, I mean, if you're the board of directors at Cyberpunk, you should have looked at this and said, no. Pick a lane, pal. I'm willing to say right now, this rests on his shoulders. And not because he's the CEO and the buck stops with the CEO. Sure, that's true. But because somewhere along the lines, little Adam B got it in his head he could do both jobs. You cannot do both jobs at the same time. Even Kojima had a producer on Death Stranding. Now, Kojima still may have had final say, but that was a game, my understanding is that was a game that was not plagued with delays or, I mean, maybe they crunched like motherfuckers, but they got it out on time. They didn't have extensions like Cyberpunk. Now, maybe Kojima could override the producer, but maybe Kojima was smart enough to go, you know, you only override that fucking producer if it's really fucking important. But yeah, when you're running the whole fucking show and you've only made one game before and that game was with a lot less people, and you're also directing the game, holy shit, man. That's like throwing matches at kegs of black powder and just going, I don't understand why there was an explosion. There you go. You know, maybe you guys knew this. I only found this out today. This ain't too hard to figure out what went wrong. Adam, buddy, I'm sure you're ambitious. I'm sure you're incredibly talented across the board. Pick a lane, buddy, because this is going to keep happening if you don't.